The next item is the National Policy Statement work program that we've got to undertake in response to the National Policy Statement on Urban Development released by the Minister late last year. And for this item, Claire Gray, our Principal Advisor of Growth and Spatial Strategy, has been doing the work, and Dawn Mackay, Manager of Growth and Spatial Strategy also, and John Dogood, of course, Manager of Plans and Places. Now look, I'll put the recommendation up. I'll move the A. Do I have a second for the A, which is to endorse the program as outlined in the report? Thank you, Councillor Walker. So that's moved and seconded. Now I'll hand to John and Claire and Dawn. I think, is it with you, Claire? Are you leading this one, Claire, or starting off with you, John? It is with Claire. Yeah. Good.
Great, thanks. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Claire Gray toko ingoa. And yeah, as the Chair said, I'm working in Auckland Plan Strategy and Research, but together with Plans and Places, we've been looking at the proposed work program for the Council's response to our requirements coming out of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. So today I really just wanted to briefly outline kind of the process of where we've landed with the work program and briefly talk through the main aspects. Just a bit of background to refresh everyone on how we've arrived here. This is part of the government's urban growth agenda, and it sits under the urban planning pillar. And this has been going on for a couple of years since the government came in the last term, and they've been rolling out various changes, and this National Policy Statement is one of those. It relates to spatial strategy and land use planning. At a very high level, I've just put up a couple of points there about what the intention is, what the government want to achieve through it. So it's really about planning well for growth and removing barriers that they see might be restricting development. So allowing across New Zealand development to go up and out. So we need to understand how that applies in the Auckland context. Just moving to the work program then, we've looked at the overall work program and we think that it really needs to be understood in two phases. So the first phase takes us through to about the middle of this year, and that looks at getting all the information and evidence that we need to kind of inform our Auckland Council's response to what we do in relation to the requirements coming out of the National Policy Statement. At the end of phase one, we're looking to have landed that direction, because this will then be taken up and looked at in phase two, which moves into the more detailed plan change aspects. And phase two also moves into some of the preparation of strategic documents like the Future Development Strategy, which will need to inform the next long-term plan, the 2024 LTP. So just looking at the work streams that we've developed, these relate to really the most strategically significant pieces of work that we see coming out of the NPS, and we've identified these 7 work streams. Yeah, there's also some in there that are in relation to the time frames given in the NPS. So the NPS does set specific time frames for most of this work, and some of them are sooner than others. Like, for example, work stream 7, the removal of car parking minimums, the deadline for that is January next year, whereas the deadline for a lot of the other work is August next year. So that's how we've sort of arrived at which work streams are in phase 1. We'll be bringing all of these work streams to planning workshops, future planning workshops and committees, where we'll have the opportunity to go over them in a lot of detail and have really good discussions about what some of the implications might be coming out of the approach that we're thinking of taking in response to these areas of work. So this is just a look at the schedule of workshops and meetings that we're envisaging bringing the work to. Some of them are grouped together because there is a lot of overlap between some of these work streams. A lot of the work is really interconnected, and you can't really look at one aspect without understanding the rest of the package of work that we need to do. So we've arrived at the proposal is for a series of committee workshop meetings. So you'll see that in the middle column. So from starting with the first one in a couple of weeks on the 17th of February and going through till essentially May, and then all of them being wrapped up and brought together to a 3rd of June planning committee meeting where we can consider the implications of the whole package of work together. And then, because we think that there'll be some pretty significant strategic decisions coming out of that meeting, we have also got a further committee workshop in June to think about any further changes that we might need or consequential changes that have arisen at that 3rd of June committee meeting. And then again, it all gets wrapped up together in a July or August committee meeting. We do also have a couple of slightly separate parts of the work program that aren't so sort of intricately tied together with the other aspects. So one of them is car parking, and you'll see the removal of the car parking minimum, and you'll see that that's scheduled for a July or August committee meeting. And then the last row there down the bottom is talking about our requirement to produce a housing and business capacity assessment. The full report needs to be published by the 31st of July this year, so the intention is to come to the 1st of July committee meeting to get approval before we publish that report. So moving to phase 2, which is really from the middle of this year onwards, and once we've landed this kind of strategic direction and approach that I'm talking about, it really moves into the more detailed plan change phase of work. And the bulk of that preparation of the plan changes takes us through to August 2022. So there's basically a year for preparation of plan changes, and we need to get them notified by August 2022. So we'll be looking at a program of work in relation to the second phase, and we'll bring that back to you closer to the time of phase 2 starting. It does also, just better point out that it does also include some dates beyond August 2022, so a lot of this work that's required is to feed into the 2024 long-term plan, so we need to prepare various evidence and strategic documents before then. So the housing and business capacity assessment and also the future development strategy that's currently sitting in the Auckland plan will need to be re-looked at. Just moving on to the work that we've been doing with local board services to think about how local boards can be included in this work program. We will be inviting local board chairs or alternates to all of the planning committee workshops, so starting with the 17th of February. And we've also separately arranged a local board Skype briefing, which is for all local board members on the 5th of March. So the content of that would be sort of similar to what we're having here today, an overview of the MPS and the expected work program and when local board members can expect to be included in that work program. We've also been looking at how to specifically engage Māori. So we intend to prepare, we have prepared and we intend to send the memo to the next Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum. And yeah, similar to the local boards, it's about introducing the MPS and the expected work program, and when the forum, well, if and when the forum would like to be involved in that work program. So once we get a feel for what aspects, how much capacity they have and what aspects they're most interested in, we can figure out what kind of material we take and how we do it. And we also plan to contact iwi individually to talk about specific aspects that might be of interest. In terms of an engagement plan, we're working on that at the moment to think about how we involve our other partners and stakeholders and communities. There are some requirements in the MPSUD for us to engage in relation to specific areas of work. So it's going to be a plan that looks at our requirements as well as what we would like to do as a council that is broader and would go beyond that. The bulk of the engagement is likely to be focused on the second phase of work when it gets into more of the detailed plan change analysis. That's when we'll know how it will, what the implications will be at a more local level across Auckland. And these are just the next steps. So coming back to you on the 17th of February for a workshop on a couple of the specific areas of work that we've talked about, and continue to work on the 7 work streams. The time frames that the MPS gives are tight, so we're working hard. And yeah, continue to work with local board services and continue to work with Kaitiaki Forum and iwi.
Thank you, Kate. Just to the outset, now the MPS Urban Development was released, it's about 5.5 months ago, and this is our first report. Some have already asked me, as Planning Committee Chair, why is it taking you so long? Now, I understand a lot of work has been undertaken since August to get to here. John or Claire, Dawn, maybe you could just outline what it has taken to get us to here, that there is maybe a sense that we have not responded as quickly as some would expect. The second question is, can we have absolute assurance that the LTP proposal that's going up for consultation now contains a budget that is completely adequate to address the response to the MPS UD, and that there is some contingency within that, because I think as members engage in this, it'll probably throw up some questions and some consequential work that maybe wasn't anticipated by the Minister and the Ministry when they were finalising the MPS. So those 2 key questions. And my third question is, at the outset, is there's one component where we do not go to the public, and that is on workstream 7, I think, is it? Car parking? That we do not go to the public. That's been made pretty clear, not our choice. It's in the MPS. Can we get that out quicker? Can we fast track any that component or any other components? Probably a question for you, John. Questions 3.
Thank you, Chair. So in response to the timeframe for bringing this report to you, I guess we had hoped to try and potentially bring something in December, but just prioritising the work of some of our teams, finding leads for these various work streams. Jacques Victor is the General Manager for Auckland Plan Strategy and Research, and myself getting together and giving the team some direction around this work program really just took us through until it was too late to make the December agenda, unfortunately. So would have liked to have come in December, but we just want to have a really good, officers' discussion around the work program and how to sort of approach the NPS UD and establish these work streams and confirm which staff are leading the different work streams and get them doing some work around that. We have been working with legal services and our colleagues in the consents department because some aspects of the NPS urban development apply immediately. So there's been some work happening on that front. In terms of the second question around the long-term plan and is there sufficient budget to respond to the NPS UD, I assume, Chair, you're referring to the operational budget for us to undertake the work as opposed to the longer-term implications for investment in CapEx, infrastructure and so on, and that comes as part of a subsequent phase around developing the new future development strategy for Auckland, which is required under the NPS UD, which will replace the development strategy in the Auckland plan, the housing and business assessment work. So, and the NPS UD is really geared up, I think as Claire may have mentioned, to influence the next LTP 2024 and a new future development strategy for Auckland in advance of that. So that's when we'll know a lot more about the financial implications of responding to this NPS UD as we work through things over the next 2 or so years. But to tackle the other aspect of it around OPEX for operational expenditure for staff, we do feel that at this stage, and then confirm as well, that we are in a good position if the LTP goes through as it stands to do the technical work required to get us through to certainly through to August next year with the plan changes. Dawn, you may have something else to add, but generally speaking, we feel we've got the resources. We are reprioritising some of our work and completing some work within the Chief Planning Office to shift our attention onto the NPS urban development, and also the NPS freshwater management is another fairly significant government direction that we're having to reprioritise and sort of move people onto it. But Dawn, can you? Yeah.
So on that, is the work program maintained? Is the balance of the work program maintained, or are there going to be delays in the balance of the Planning Office work program to attend to the NPS UD?
I think we're fortunate in that some of the spatial planning that we've been doing in the greenfields over the last few years, the structure plans in Drury, Opeheki, Pukoi Pairata, Warkworth, Whanuapai, we've completed that spatial planning work. That's quite a big program for the Chief Planning Office. The spatial planning within the existing urban areas, we're mainly focused around the wider Roskilde area with Kaingaora, Māngere Tahu, and a couple of smaller locations, but a lot of that work is coming to an end as well. So we are fortunate in that our spatial planning work is reaching a natural sort of end point around about the middle of this year to then shift onto this more RMA statutory planning work. So in short, no, we're pretty good to maintain the key things in our work program.
I think through the chair, just at a broader level, there's a lot of work going on, whether generated, by the council and committees, but also government. And so in the next number of years, and I've said this to you before, there is a massive work program going on, and we will not be able to continue to do everything that we thought we would, without these extra pieces of work coming on at us. Having said that, John is absolutely right. We are prioritising this work, the freshwater management work. There is resource management reform coming through, so we will need to put resource into that as well. But our work program has changed and will change. We will not be able to do everything that you may want us to do, for example, and so we will talk to you about, well, if you want us to do that, then what's going to drop off. So we are absolutely in that position, but we feel that we have the resourcing, both FTE, numbers of people and budget, to do this work, and we've put that through, into the budget certainly for the next few years.
And the final question. Oh, sorry, Dawn.
I was just going to say through the chair, there is a bit of a bid in the LTP for resources as well. So that's
Understand that. And look, the last one before we take other questions was the car parking. Is there ability to fast track that?
We have one planner working full time on it, and so we'll certainly give the committee an update at the workshop on how that work's progressing. I can't say at the stage, I'm not entirely sure, but we think it would be good to move ahead with that one before the January date next year, if possible. So we'll have to come back to you on the time frame around that. It sounds straightforward, just delete the parking standards, but a lot of those standards tie into some strong objectives in the plan or policies for certain locations in Auckland, and it's a little bit more complex than it might sound. So we're just working our way through that. We'll give you an update when we can.
Okay, we'll hear on the 17th on that and others. Mayor Goff, please.
Yeah, thanks. If I can just take a little while over this, Mr. Chairman, and it is a question, and it's around how we structure our discussion of the implications of the NPS. When it last came to the committee, I think it was July last year, and we had very limited time. In fact, I think we had to delegate the submission making to the chair and officers, because there was less than a month between gazetting the proposal and putting it in place. We made submissions on it. I don't think yet, John, we've had a chance to actually discuss what the government's response to those submissions were, or even to discuss our submissions as a group. So I guess my question is around the first session. You know, it's great work stream set out here, but it's atomising it into specific areas. And I think we need a general discussion about implications of NPS. And can I just elaborate on it, because it touches on your questions, Mr. Chair, which I think were pertinent. In the paper, you've got that the NPS requires us to provide sufficient infrastructure-ready development capacity so that more homes can be built in response to demand. Now, we've done that in the unitary plan, and we've walked over broken glass to try to get funding to keep our infrastructure development up, notwithstanding COVID-19. But if the expectation, and we had it from the Leader of the Opposition, so both sides of Parliament are guilty of this, they say, you shall do this, you shall provide the infrastructure. They just forget to say one thing: how do we provide that infrastructure? Because at the moment we're whacked by COVID-19, we've got climate change to deal with, we've got water supply to deal with, we've got renewal of amenities, and you know, it's great to have on high the command, thou shalt provide infrastructure, but God, please tell us how. Because what we haven't had in response to our submissions is how we can broaden our revenue base to do some of the things that they want us to do and we want to do, but there's never been a response short of the IFF legislation, which is partially helpful but not fully helpful. So I think we need to have a broader discussion around that before we get into the specific topics. And can I just raise a question about the car parking as well? And I said this in private to other councillors at a recent meeting. I went through Flatbush with the cops late one night 2 weeks ago, and you could barely get the cop car up the bloody road because the cars were parked on the berms, the side of the road, etc. And I can give you a dozen examples across the city. Now we're being told that you take away all car parking. Now that's nice. If I lived in Ponsonby, I could just catch a bus or hop on the train. Actually, Flatbush doesn't have a rail line, and it doesn't have sufficient connections, and it doesn't have a shopping centre right in the midst of it. People have to have cars. So we're not going to the public on it, but it's a real problem out there. And I'd kind of like an explanation, or at least a discussion, around how we deal with this transitional phase that we're in, that might go on for years, between moving away from a car-dependent society, but still being one at the moment, because there's no other way of doing it. So the question is around, I think we need a space, maybe I direct it to Megan, we need a space where we can talk about some of these wider issues rather than focusing on it just one narrow section by one narrow section, because we've never really had the opportunity in this body as a whole to talk about the wider picture. Now, you know, I'm sympathetic to the goals of the NPS, but there are some big problems involved in it, and I don't think we've had answers from government, and I think we need to look at it holistically, comprehensively, before we break it down into the sections. So just seeking some feedback from Megan or maybe John on, I think we need to do that, and you Mr Chair, because you're actually you're in charge of the committee, can we have that session so we can go through this and focus on what the challenges are and the adequacy or otherwise of a directive without an explanation of how you deal with the consequences of that directive? I'm sorry it took so long.
Thank you through the chair. Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I think that's really helpful, and we can certainly do that for you. We did a workshop with you all in September, I think it was last year, and so we probably touched on some of that, but again, we were also trying to learn and understand it ourselves at that point. So we're in a better position now to understand implications or possible implications depending on the direction that we get from you over the next 6 months. So I think it's really helpful. We will work on that. And if there are any other feedback or things you would like us to deal with in that kind of context setting, please just let me know. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Goff. I think we do need a bit of a refresher, even though I think there was a memorandum that went around and it summarised our submission and looked at the MPS response. But look, I personally don't have much of a memory of that either, so I think we do need a refresher. And we'll do that maybe in the first part of that 17th of February workshop. Thanks, Mayor Goff. And Councillor Walker, next question.
Sure, got a few questions. The first one picks up from the comment that the Mayor just made, and it goes to the work streams. I look at the work streams, and there isn't a work stream there around funding and finance, and specifically funding and finance of infrastructure. And I would have thought that was critical. I mean, we have, just by way of context, I call it a death spiral around development contributions and funding. It's as bad as that, and the situation is progressively getting worse. When are we going to address that? We're at our debt limit, and as far as DCs are concerned, we're not collecting the contributions that we need to fund infrastructure, especially out in the greenfields areas. That's part of the death spiral, and in the brownfield areas it's even worse. That's death spiral Mark 2. And this is critical stuff, and it's against a background where we've got accelerated provision of housing in areas where there isn't infrastructure. So that's one question I've got. The other question I've got goes to the car parking, and I would suggest the mislabelling of that. Essentially, the issue is around mobility, and the question I have that goes to these areas where we're proposing to eliminate the car parking, if we look at mobility, what follows is that there will be higher mobility and parking requirements around micro-mobilities, bikes, scooters, the car shares, the EV plug-ins. Where do the increasing number of disabled people in our society, many of whom have to have personalised transport cars that's customised for their requirements, where do they park? Where do the shared buses and the like park? And where is the evidence around what is happening in the EV space, where we are moving to a situation where you will have EVs that are carbon neutral, powered by solar in homes, and Elon Musk is driving that at a rapid rate. So from a carbon perspective, the parking and the like is not going to equate in terms of emissions. The issue will be around congestion and road space. And where is the evidence around that? And the notion that if you've got a car and it's an electric car, and there are a number of people actually in it, it's actually more carbon neutral than a bus that may not have many people in it, even if it's an EV bus. So my question is actually around the evidence that is dealing to this issue around car parking, or what I would suggest more widely defined as mobility, because I haven't seen it, and I keep asking this, because in these developments, these new developments, there aren't parking spaces provided for bikes and stuff. It's bluntly it. So where are we going? And then the last question I've got, and it goes to workstream number 1, well-functioning urban environment. What are the implications of this on the ground around loss of heritage, loss of urban trees? Because as you look around what's actually happening right now in terms of the unitary plan, the properties where you see the intensive development have every stick of vegetation removed, and you've got development that's plastered so close to the boundaries it's not funny, scarcely any pervious surface at all in some of these developments. And as Councillor Stewart would back me up, in some areas significant stormwater issues that have not been addressed, and I'm referring to parts of Howick where the drainage network is on private properties, and the number of properties that are subject to flooding of areas where people live and park is significant, with no budget to address that. So these are some related issues that go to how we address these work streams, Mr. Chair, because I have a real concern that in terms of what the government is proposing, they're out of touch with what's happening on the ground in Auckland.
Okay, look, there's a range of questions there. Now, we can have some responses now, but a lot of that's probably going to be necessary at the first workshop as well. So I don't want to curtail, you know, a response from you and to Councillor Walker. But can we just clarify, please, because on the car parking, and it's just one of a number of work streams, there is no suggestion that we're removing the ability of a developer or an individual to provide car parking. We're just following the government edict is that this territorial authority and every other territorial authority shall remove the requirement for minimum car parking. Can we just confirm that there's no suggestion that we're going to stop the market from providing car parking?
Mr. Chair, and to Councillor Walker, that's correct. It's not preventing the market from providing parking. It's not requiring the council to change the unitary plan to ban the provision of off-street parking as part of a development, but it's just preventing all councils throughout the country from specifically requiring the market to deliver that car parking. But there will certainly be implications for the use of road space, and so I think that the key thing I want to assure you is that we are working with Auckland Transport on our response to the NPSUD. That I think these are very good points, and just a reminder to us that when we're bringing these work streams to you, we need to bring our colleagues from AT along to address, you know, how AT sees the council, Auckland Transport, responding to parking changes in parking and the use of road space as the NPSUD sort of becomes implemented. And also with our finance colleagues as well. I think those are key points around the funding and financing of infrastructure. We need to sort of weave that into these workshops, and certainly in the first workshop around well-functioning environment. Just very briefly, things like heritage, historic heritage and natural hazards from flooding. The NPS urban development does allow the council to keep the zoning as it currently is in those areas, and that's something we'll work through with you under the intensification work stream. And the qualifying matters is what they refer to in the NPS urban development. If it's a qualifying matter such as natural hazard or historic heritage, you can take a different approach to those locations. So there's a lot of work involved there. But that's, yeah, I think we'll leave the rest till the workshops.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and again, I'm just picking up on the comment that the Mayor made about Flatbush, and I agree with him completely. In respect of these work streams and the evidence that we collect, can we look at particular case studies around Auckland? Flatbush would be an excellent one. Central Albany, where there are chronic problems around parking, would be another. and I'm sure councillors and local boards might have some examples, so that we can put something together that people actually understand by way of example, and obviously the government could pick up on some of the stuff. So can we have some case studies?
Yeah, I think we'll look at that. I would suggest that the chronic problem is one of connectivity rather than parking. You know, parking is a symptom of poor connectivity, or parking congestion. But look, I won't dwell into that at the moment. We'll take other questions. Member Namani, please.
Kia ora. I think my question mostly relates to the engagement process with iwi. Is it still a work in progress? Okay. Will it be something that we can talk about in phase one? And then, but also knowing that you're sending memos out to the Kaitiaki Forum and iwi. I'd probably put that round the other way in my own view, knowing where this is heading, which is a plan change, you know. But I think the other thing is, don't forget Mātāwaka, marae particularly, because they have, you know, there's potentially a bit of impact on that. So, yeah, my question was just around that initial memo, how wide's that going within the iwi Mātāwaka potentially community?
Thank you. Yeah, the intention for that specific memo is just for the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum. But yeah, pick up on your point about the Mātāwaka, and we'll look at that. And yes, you're right, we are at a very early stage of developing the kind of plan around engagement for all Māori. We've only just last week or the week before been speaking to the Kaitiaki Forum contact about how to engage with the forum. Yeah, work in progress.
That's not a cuss-cotting, is it? Exercise to make it quicker? Because, I mean, I'm only saying that as I think it's important that you engage with the Kaitiaki Forum, but sometimes iwi, who at the end of the day the relationship's with, don't participate in the forum. So I just want you to be fully cognizant of that nuance and ensure that your bases are covered.
Thank you. And on the timing, yes, the intention is to start engagement in this phase one now, essentially, but it will obviously have to continue through to the more detailed work in phase two. Yeah.
And don't forget, just from the previous agenda, that you've got some really good models out there. So, you know, look across rather than to in terms of what could help.
Thank you, Member Namani. And Councillor Cashmore, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, team. When this legislation was passed, the government put out some papers around it, which I read, but it was in the pre-Christmas fog. So there are some quite directional things that this legislation includes, like things like TODs, transport nodes, heritage, where it says you can't have an overlay heritage, you've got to be to a specific, like specific house or specific building. Do we have a list of those, or will you be giving us a list of those things that are must-dos where we don't have any discretion in, or have I got that wrong?
Through Chair, we'll certainly in the workshops be explaining all of that to you. It's probably a bit too much detail to explain it now, but we'll certainly in each of the workshops go into a lot of detail around what Council can and can't do in responding. But you're absolutely right, it's very directive in terms of minimum heights of buildings that are meant to be allowed around the city centre, metro centres, the train stations and the whole train network, the North Shore busway. It's very specific around minimum heights of 6 stories in those locations, unless there are some qualifying matters where you can perhaps exclude areas. So that's the detail we'll certainly bring to those workshops.
If I can, Mr. Chair, that will come with quite some ramifications that are different to our unitary plan rules, and some of them are also similar. And does it affect things like the view shafts and that sort of thing, or is that they're exempt from it? I just couldn't find any reference to that. I don't recall a reference.
Well, that's something we'll discuss in detail, but it's a bit of work in progress. Arguably, the view shafts are an automatic qualifying matter that the council could exclude, but we're still working through the detail of that. The NPSUD doesn't specifically talk about view shafts, but it talks about matters of national importance under the RMA, and the relationship of mana whenua with the maunga is a pretty clear matter of national importance, so there's probably a strong argument there that they can be excluded. Yeah. Where they constrain development below that six levels, yeah.
Thank you. And Councillor Stewart?
Thank you. Really pleased that the Mayor touched on Flatbush, because all communities are not equal, and pleased that Councillor Walker touched on the catchment I'm talking about out at Angelo Avenue. One of the things that I think would be really, really useful, and I just wondered what you think of this, John, if we started having some of our working workshops on a bus, and we go to different parts of the region where there's some things that are really quite significant, like the Angelo catchment, and there might be something out in Albany, there could be something over the Devonport or in Mount Eden or whatever, and the only way we're really going to get a real grasp of what's going on in the communities and an understanding is to go out there and have a look. Just on the removing of parking, especially in places like Flatbush, and reducing parking, we just haven't got the public transport out there. So we've got all these people that are living out there, and some homes have got 3 or 4 cars, and it's because they haven't got public transport. And a lot of the people that are living out in Flatbush, they have to travel, might have to go out to Mangere or wherever to work, and they need cars. And when we're developing our communities, I think we have to really be careful, because I'm hoping that the Mayor went and had a look at just where Flatbush School Road is, just that development that's like an island on its own, and there's about 3,000 people living on this little island, and they've got a terrible road that they have to use to get to the schools, and especially the primary school. No footpaths. It's just terrible. But the other thing is that with the roads that they have there, most of the roads, because of flooding issues and everything, they've got all these swales and everything. So there's a lot of the houses that have been built out there already haven't even got car parking. There's nowhere to park, and if you go to visit someone, you have to park sometimes 1 or 2 streets away to go and visit. And if you've got having a Christmas family Christmas dinner or something like that, well, it's not really very inviting to having families turn up, and they have to park 2 or 3 car parks streets away, and they've got little ones, and so I think with the planning and everything, we need to get it right. Yeah. Anyway, so what do you think about the tiki tours and the bus trips? Because I have had a couple of councillors that have come out to have a look at some of the issues in my community, and I know Councillor Josephine was wanting to come out, but she couldn't come that time. But I think it would be very useful.
So through the chair, as staff, we're more than happy to support some focus workshops if the committee is interested in doing that. And I guess that's back with you, Chair, and members of the committee. If you think there are some, if there's an interest in workshops on some of these key topics, we're more than happy to arrange that. Yeah.
And I think that's another item for the 17th for us to discuss and for the staff to make a note of, and we'll pick it up on that at that first workshop. Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm mindful that we're, as a council, we're a creature of statute, and you've invited us for questions, and I would love to give you a rant about what I think the government is trying to do with urban development and how they want things to be better for everyone now and for everyone into the future. But I want to be realistic about the recommendations you're putting to us and ask a question in and around that. So with the recommendations, I mean, I can't do anything really but support what the recommendation here says, endorse the work programme and series of upcoming workshops and meetings to establish the Council's approach to the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. But everything that I'm hearing from others is, it's like a book of riddles for children. You know, we just, we're getting in, and normally I, at this point, would ask Dawn, because she's very good at demystifying things for me, you know, to cut to the chase on, you know, how we might get to where we need to be. But this is, and likening it to riddles and so forth, this is kind of, for me at the moment, and my question I'm coming to is, it's like the emperor's new clothes. Yes, we want all these things for urban development, but as the Mayor very clearly articulated, there's a great big problem. And why? You know, everyone's jumping on the act. We've got Brooke Van Velden, whatever her name is, in today's paper about how she's going to ensure housing supply, and we've had the National Party, and we've got the Labour. Everyone's in on it. But like the emperor's new clothes, no one's actually talking about what the real problem is. So how do we, you know, you had up here before staff will, and the staff are doing a great job. Well done, staff. That's fantastic. But what are we doing as elected members to say, cut the bullshit. Let's actually come to the point where the obstacle lies, and that is, we want the housing, we will do the housing, but we need the infrastructure, and to have the infrastructure, we are going to have to find new revenue. So what recommendation, Mr. Chair, and you've been really close to this, but what recommendation can we put up today of what we can do? The Mayor alluded to the fact that we put in a submission. Nobody knows what the response to that is. And Parliament, I'm not going to say government, because I think everybody's as bad as each other down there. Nobody is actually, you know, Councillor Stewart's suggesting that the odd site visit and things, and I'm a great believer in site visits, but we've done all those sites. We know what the problem is, and we had a bit of a discussion about it yesterday to a degree in terms of transport. How do we advocate, as the largest city in New Zealand, a little bit of common sense? How do we actually do it? Everybody wants good quality urban housing. We know how we can do it. And we don't have a debate about how we are going to use the strategic skill sets that we might have as elected members to coerce, you know, whether it's briefings across parties, because they all seem to want to be able to work together on this, but to get the answers that we need, because otherwise it just remains riddles. And we can go round and round and round and round in circles looking at all the individual components of this thing, but that gets lost in the forest of whatever. I ask Megan, yourself, the Mayor, I don't think politics should come into this. I just want us to be able to, recognising that we're a creature of statute, just to have that little voice of reason as to what is being lost here. Because otherwise we'll be discussing this in another year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And we just go round and round in circles. So my question is, what are we going to do?
Look, can I open that first and then go to the Mayor? So this is an MPS for the whole of the nation. In some ways, in many ways, this city has responded to, through the entry plan and the future urban land supply strategy, the Auckland plan with a development strategy, we've actually put in train everything possible. Out to 2050, we're making feasible 1.137 million dwelling units possible.
Agree. We've done everything.
We do not have a land supply issue in Auckland.
I agree.
We have a housing response problem in Auckland, and we have an acute housing affordability issue in Auckland. Now, the affordability issue is being addressed through this committee, and that's been delegated. Councillor Bartley, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Casey are leading some work with government agencies on that. So in some ways, we are bound to respond to this MPS. And there are aspects of this MPS that really concern me, like the requirement to be responsive to proposals that come forward. My guess is that people are anticipating this MPS, the response of the council to this MPS, and are already taking land positions that are well outside the future urban land supply strategy. They are now speculating on rural sites, northwest, and I won't name them, but the overseas investment officers signed off on a couple, despite our feedback to them through our staff. So there are some real contentions there, and it's not easy. We are going to have to grapple with this. But the thrust of it is we have an infrastructure, funding and financing issue. We do not have a land supply issue in Auckland. We've made feasible over 1 million development sites, but we have an acute affordability issue. And I don't see in the MPS for urban development a nuanced response or a targeted response to the big boiling question of affordability. Supply, from around the world, all the research shows that just doing supply does not necessarily address affordability, and it definitely doesn't address retained affordability, keeping affordable dwellings in proximity to where people need to live to be able to work or live to be able to study.
So, Mr. Chairman, I agree with you, and in the unitary plan we have identified all of that, and our staff are doing everything that we have asked of them. So the staff need to know that their recommendations are fine. My question is, what are we as elected members doing? Otherwise we will keep chasing our tail.
Maybe if I can just add to that. Firstly, I think Councillor Fletcher, you and I are totally aligned on this, which may surprise some people. And equally, what Chair Chris Darby has said. When Judith Collins said the other day, we need to change our zoning laws, I thought there is a clear example of the gap between local government and central government and their understanding of what we've done. We've changed our bloody zoning laws. There are more than 1 million sites there, and I said as politely as possible, respecting the role of the Leader of the Opposition, of which I was once one, that the issue is not about zoning, it's about funding for infrastructure. Today, I've just received, nobody will have seen, I think yet, the final figures for consenting for 2020, the year of COVID. 16,500 consents issued in the year to December 2020, an all-time record, and in the month of December we consented more houses than they did in 2008, 2009, 2010 and 2011 combined for the same month. People are saying, oh, but you're not getting any pressure from immigration. True, nobody's coming to New Zealand as immigrants, but 100,000 New Zealanders have returned to New Zealand, and proportionately, I would think, to Auckland since we locked down, which is higher than the level of migration. And what's more, no Kiwi is immigrating at the moment. They can't. So the growth pressures are there, and I'm just, as you were speaking, I was drafting my press statement, making the point very clearly to government that, you know, might be sympathetic to what they're trying to do with the MPS, but they've got to understand our problem is about funding infrastructure. And it's alongside all of the other pressures that are on us, and you cannot do that on the rating base that the legislation provides for, unless you're going to put 20% rate increases. And when we do that, there won't be very many survivors around this table. So we've got to have, and I will continue to push, and I'm pushing right as we speak, for the government to start to address that problem of infrastructure funding, because the IFF Act is helpful, but it's only part of the problem. part of the solution, and we need a whole lot more things. The pressure of growth is not going away from Auckland. If anything, it may be getting worse. And while we welcome that new housing, and they tell us under the MPS, we've got to provide the infrastructure, they haven't explained how.
Can't we, I mean, Grant Robertson is a lovely guy, I really like him at a personal level. Can't we invite him and whomever his equivalents are, and actually just sit down and have a discussion, drawing attention to this, because everyone wants the same outcomes. It's the strategies to get there.
And at the risk of people starving, and I don't want to prolong it, no, absolutely, we've got to keep up that communication, and we've got to keep up that process of education. And I've got to confess, and you probably do the same, that in central government I did not understand the constrained environment in which local government is acting. And we've worked, and Bill and I have worked quite closely together with Bill English, with Stephen Joyce, with Jacinda Ardern, Grant Robertson, and we've got to keep that up. I see caucuses regularly. The ACT caucus is coming to see me. I'll be making that point. I haven't read Brooke's article yet, but I suspect I knew what she was going to write when I glanced at it. And I will be keeping up that pressure, both from myself and I think on behalf of everybody here. We've just got to have a recognition of that challenge. And the MPS says, thou shalt do this, without being very helpful on giving us the mechanism by which we can achieve that, and all of the other things that the Commission on Climate Change, etc., is asking of us. I want to do all of those things, but I can't and we can't do that unless we have a funding source that enables us to do that.
So could we have a B today? So in addition to the endorsement of the work program, the B, along the lines of conveying just what the Mayor has said and having it validated by everybody in this room to say, you're not going to get the outcomes you want unless you identify some funding streams to achieve it.
If I may, Mr. Chair, because this is about work program, the conversation has strayed, and quite understandably and appropriately, to the critical issue. I'm not sure that we want to amend that. I'm just taking the body language around this table is that everybody is actually on the same track about continuing that pressure. I've seen nobody in any way suggest dissent to the need to keep pressure up, and you're quite right, Councillor Fletcher, it's on the whole of Parliament, not just the government, to recognise that to solve these problems, there has to be a mechanism by which we can raise the funds to do the fundamental things that are needing to be done. So I'm not sure we need to put it in the resolution, but I think there's 100% support for what you've said, what Councillor Darby has said, and what I've said. If anybody has a different view, speak now or forever hold your peace. But we have discussed this, and it is an ongoing thing, not simply changing one recommendation in one paper, but keeping up that pressure and doing it collectively as a council, irrespective of our personal political views and backgrounds. And I think that's what, hopefully will give us some strength in this.
Otherwise, we're just like little mice on a treadmill. I would love to see us brief all the parties together and tell it like it is.
So I think we do have a meeting with ministers coming up. It's in plan at the moment,
Yep,
Mayor.
we've got, I'm working on the program of ministers now. We've got Minister Wood up first later this month, I think. So as soon as I've got the detail of that locked in, we'll let you know. And we need to do it to every minister, every member of Parliament. Some of you have got some of the councillors have got better contacts within the National Party than I've got, and we should be using that with the Greens, with ACT. It should be across the board to get that message across. Yep, look, we're on the same track as to what we want, but let's look at the critical obstacle and how we can get there. And that is a broader range of funding options to do the things that need to be done on the ground. Don't just tell us to do infrastructure, help us find the way to raise the funds to do it, short of, draconian rate increases that we will not, I don't think, get support for.
Yeah.
So for those meetings with ministers, Member Councillor Fletcher, I think we might just have to narrow the issues down to the three really
Absolutely.
big things like infrastructure funding and housing affordability, rather than maybe wandering into a lot of territory that we'd like to canvass with the ministers, but just really having a much deeper
Otherwise,
discussion
look for
about
the
a
trees.
few really big, chunky
Yep.
issues facing Auckland.
Thank you.
Okay, look, we're probably extending a little bit on this, so, but important conversation. I think we'll leave it there, and Mayor's office will be organising that, and we'll distribute, I think the agenda for those meetings will be distributed prior, so we can confirm it ourselves. Let's go to further questions. Councillor Hills and then Councillor Cooper, please.
Oh, well, I wasn't exactly sure because everyone's commented rather than had questions. So
It is moved and seconded, so it is open for comment.
okay, just a brief comment, I guess. Then, yes, it is hard when governments of all colours keep pushing in a direction that tells us to do something A, we're already doing, or B, something we can't do without a bunch of money. So, I mean, this is the current government pushing us, and we will inevitably have to do it. The opposition last week says we should do everything, open everything up, and remove the requirement for infrastructure, which would make things even worse. The issue around, I just hope we focus on the big picture, not focus on, if we do focus on car parking in a specific development that was an SHA that was built out of sequence, yes, that's an issue. If we focus on just urban trees but don't focus on the motorways knocking, Puhoi to Wellsford knocked down a whole Kodi forest, 400 Kodi gone because we extended housing that way. Mill Road is getting rid of hundreds of homes and hundreds of trees. So the more we sprawl, the more, it's one or two trees in a local area building a couple hundred apartments near a train station will inevitably remove cars off the road and help congestion and help people move around. If we keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over, we're going to have the same problems. We're a skinny, weird-shaped isthmus, and we don't have more room to widen roads. We don't have more room for motorways. And right now, we are not providing any options for people to live, especially younger people, in this close to jobs, close to universities, close to their whānau. That people, the only options we're giving young people is to move out or move to the outskirts of our city, and then they have to buy a car, and then they have to sit in the back of the queue of the last development that happened 3 years before. So I think there is some real good in this bit of legislation, because it is going to, the main focus is to try and build around the transport we do have, because Stats New Zealand shows that we've had a dramatic rise in bus use, ferry use, train use, walking and cycling through the census, but that's only really happened around the places where there is the stations and the bus stations and the access. So we need to do two things: make sure there's a lot more building around those nodes to encourage the use of the current public transport, and then we have to try and work with government and everyone else to provide transport to everywhere else. At the moment, we're doing neither of those things, and we're going to keep making the same mistakes and then complain about all our random local examples instead of looking at the big picture. So I think this is going to happen to us, so we have to try and be proactive and actually try and design the city we want, not the city that we're already angry at. So I don't know. It does worry me that we get so focused on the negative details when actually we're trying to reverse decades and decades of, in my opinion, mistakes that is leaving our communities stretched out, divided, and living costly, carbon-hungry lives apart from their families. So thanks.
Wise words, and thank you. Councillor Cooper, last thoughts.
I suppose it's just on the back of that is, this is a big regional conversation rather than just the little bits. But for me, this is such a confusing MPS. I mean, it was put out by the last Minister of Housing, who didn't understand that we'd already provided land for 440,000 houses, and he wanted to just do away with the MUL. You've got, I don't even know what this new person thinks, whoever they are. You've got them giving, in one part of government going, yeah, you can buy this rural land in Kumeu. We're going to be up for this great big, private plan changes. Everybody will want it. No sewage, no housing, no water, no roads, no water. So they need to talk to themselves. I'm really angry because I just feel, every time we spread out, We just block it off for the existing people. You know, and it's hard enough in their lives to get to work, and then you just put more at the top of the funnel. And I've been saying this for years with the SHAs and Kumu, and I remember, I think you, myself and a few of us voted against that first, and then we were forced to do it. And I just feel we're going to continue to be forced to do stupid stuff. And you know, Councillor Hills is talking about trying to reverse stuff. We're just carrying on what we were doing in 1964, when the Northwestern Motorway opened up, full out there, just chuck some houses out there with no amenity, no jobs, you know, nothing else. And I think we're just repeating it, we're just getting further and further away. You know, every time I hear, sorry, Councillor Cashmore, every time I hear the word Drury, I just about scream internally, you know, because when you look at some of those things we've got, it was on the last stuff around the transport stuff, was about making sure we build near train stations. No, we're just going to put a new train station there. We're going to put one there. There isn't even one there. You know.
That's what people would go through to get the jobs.
Yeah, but the reality is we are having to spend massive amount of money on infrastructure. We're not concentrating on the brownfields, which we said in the plan that we should do, and we're being pulled from pillar to post by successive governments who don't understand our role and how much of an impact, a good impact we can have if we're left to get on with our job. So I don't think it's going to help any RMA changes. You've got one side going, oh, more notification, and the other side going, more houses. Well, that's not going to work, is it? So I just see we're going to get more permissive on one hand with one of the pieces of legislation that's going to replace the RMA, and then more restrictive on the other side. So it's going to be just another, we're stuck in the middle in a dilemma, trying to implement both things, and it doesn't work. So I hope that in our work plan and what we're conveying to the government, we can actually, as Councillor Fletcher says and others have said, we've got to spell it out. And if you want us to build new stuff, pay for the stuff under the ground, because developers won't want to do it all. And even if they do, it's going to stuff up our whole roading network. And then none of them are building jobs. Sorry, I'm just a rant, but it's infuriating. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. I think it was appropriate. Thank you. I think we've had a good discussion on that one. And that brings us to a vote on the motion to endorse the work program, as you can see. In the motions, it's moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Declare that carried.